Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is the time zone you are in today. My name is Puneet. I'm responsible for marketing and fintech engagements at Infosys Finacle. And on behalf of the team who has put this webinar together, I would like to welcome you to this webinar. Today, we're gonna spend some time discussing about a very contemporary topic, the topic of artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence will power banking and make it way better than what we have seen in past and what we see today. And to discuss this topic, this team actually worked with a special group of business leaders, a group of 20 business leaders spread across 11 countries, and spent 3 months discussing the potential use case of artificial intelligence, the readiness, what it takes to succeed. And all the learnings have been put together in form of this small little webinar, as well as a brief point of view for all of us to take advantage of as we craft our AI journeys for our organizations. And for the next 1 hour, I have the privilege of having 4 of our council members who has worked together to bring this point of view to life today with us. And we're gonna first meet them, and then we'll go into this webinar talking about what artificial intelligence is all about, what it means to banking, what banks are doing with this set of technologies, and eventually we would open up the conversation for Q&A, wherein I would urge you to put in your questions on the question window which is available to you, and we'll make sure that we'll answer as many questions as possible in this 1 hour we have got together. With that, allow me to introduce our panel. First of all, allow me to welcome my colleague James Buckley. James is Regional Director for Infosys Finacle and heads our business in Europe. And James is going to take us through the foundation of artificial intelligence definition which we have put together as part of this council, and highlight some of the examples which we are seeing both in our client cases as well as from the larger industry. Joining us from the industry are Gabriel. Gabriel is Vice President of Innovation and Digital Transformation for Grupo Bancolombia, the largest bank in Colombia. Gabriel has over 25 years of experience in business consulting and IT-led transformation processes. In his illustrious career, he has led roles focusing on business strategy, consulting, digital transformation, innovation, omni-channel strategy, and organizational and cultural change. Gabriel is indeed one of the most recognized experts in digital transformation in Latin America. Welcome, Gabriel, and thank you for joining us today. I've also got Ms. Julie Colarusso. She's Senior Vice President and Digital Channel Solutions Director at Eastern Bank. Julie's head and her team is helping the bank build the technology strategy, program management, and integration efforts to build one of the finest online mobile and channel experiences in the United States. She attended the Ohio State University and has been in banking industry for over 20 years, playing variety of roles. Julie's strategic direction has set the bank on a transformational journey on engaging customer on these new digital channels and setting bank for a high growth path in this digital disruption which we are experiencing. Thank you, Julie, for joining us. And we have also got Samir from Mauritius. Samir is Group Chief Information Officer and BFSI leader at State Bank of Mauritius, the largest bank in Mauritius. Again, Samir is a very senior banking professional with extensive experience in banking, financial services, including insurance, and has in his career helped banks design, implement, and manage large transformation programs. He has deep understanding of banking and products both from a retail and corporate perspective, and a substantial exposure to emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, mobility, cloud computing, and cybersecurity. Thank you, Samir, for joining us. And without further ado, I'm going to request my colleague James to help set the foundation for artificial intelligence and what it means for banking, before we go into a Q&A session and take advantage of the practitioners to share their point of view on how banks can take charge of the AI-led transformation.
Okay, thanks very much, Puneet. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm on speakerphone here in London. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so walking through really our position on artificial intelligence, where it's obviously evolved from, what it means in general. I'll take you through a bit of a survey that we did with a large number of executives cross-industry, and then also into specific examples of where it's been applied in banking and where we think that the benefits can be accrued. And then we'll open it up to discussion, as Puneet said. So I'll share my age a bit. If we talk about the journey so far, artificial intelligence has evolved over the last 30 years or so. Back in the beginning of the 80s, I was involved in working for a company that manufactured robots, real ones, physical ones. If you know the actress Rachel Weisz, her father ran that particular company. And I can tell you at the time there was no intelligence in those machines at all. It was very primitive programming, but it served a purpose of precision. Middle of that decade, I got involved in taking organizations around Europe's first fully automated warehouse, which provided supply chain capabilities without any humans. For one of the supermarkets here in the UK. We used to show Japanese Confederation of Industry and other interested parties a fully automated, non-human operation. But again, it wasn't intelligent in any way, shape or form. The coding and the programming was very primitive and very prescriptive. And at the time, a number of my colleagues that stayed in academia actually went into artificial intelligence research and development. There were a large number of programs and still are, but especially in academia, looking into ways to essentially create machine learning, create processing that could allow machines to behave more like humans and less like automatons. And I suppose in the last 25, 30 years, we're now at the point where not only has the array of technologies evolved, but the cost to implement those technologies and take advantage of artificial intelligence techniques of various types is now at the point where banks and other organizations can use these techniques to improve efficiencies quite radically. So if we move on, Rajal, actually, whether you could move the slides for me, yeah, on to the next slide, yeah. So for banks, you know, what are the rationale and drivers behind AI technology adoption? Well, obviously, we're certainly in the West and across large swaths of the world in a low interest set of environments, and banks post the financial crisis have had to settle down to returns on investment that are about half of what they were in pre-crisis levels. Now that's created a long-term pressure to become very much more efficient, and obviously digitization in general is a whole subject in its own right with respect to driving cost efficiencies and also improving service levels and satisfaction. But within that, obviously, there are capabilities that artificial intelligence can bring to the fore. Secondly, the adoption of artificial intelligence in the wider market has meant that we're increasingly getting populations that are actually familiar with basically chatbots and virtual assistants and capabilities that they would not have been comfortable with even 5 years ago. And thirdly, especially in some of the markets where regulators are looking for more competition, we're seeing the opening up of banks in terms of APIs. So whether it's open banking or PSD2 here in Europe, or equivalent initiatives in places like Singapore and discussions in the US and elsewhere, the markets for potentially automating processes over the top of existing banks and collecting data, aggregating data, changing processes through the adoption of artificial intelligence technologies is driving potential business change. So, and I suppose the fourth tenet is that beyond it being cheap, there are now quite a large set of offerings of affordable AI platforms coming from different providers that are open source, open to APIs, and can be exploited more effectively. However, there's still I would say a paucity of capability in terms of skill sets in the market, and that's probably one of the areas that holds some organizations back in terms of what can be provided. If we move to the next slide. Infosys as an organization, obviously we're cross-industry. We recently carried out a survey on artificial intelligence and its use across a number of industrial segments. We canvassed about 1,600 individuals across industry and really asked them a series of questions around their adoption of AI and their maturity in terms of use in their organizations. And this is the structure we came up with in the picture, the results. Across the board, in general, about a third of our respondents were what we would call rising stars and visionaries. They were at the top end of the scale, in other words, adopting actively artificial intelligence, deploying successfully, and essentially seeing productivity gains and improvements embedded in their operations. About a third, again, of the respondents in general were what we called explorers. They're sitting in the middle span, the great majority, about 38%. Really, they've started on the road to using AI, have AI-related skills, and plan investments in the coming 12 months. And I suppose the laggards, the bottom third, was either skeptics, really didn't believe that AI was relevant, or watching the market. Now, just stepping out of this pure subject of artificial intelligence and looking to where the world may be in 10 to 15 years' time, it's likely that mobile phones and tablets and everything else will disappear. It's likely that augmented reality will be beamed straight to the eyes of individuals, and artificial intelligence will be a fundamental part of that transformation. It's quite a frightening thought that the world will be in that mode in 10, 15 years' time. But that's probably what it's going to be looking like, based on the likes of Googles and Amazons and others that are planning our future for us. But certainly augmented reality and artificial intelligence and capabilities in that vein will be fundamental to that future technologically driven world. So where is banking in this and financial services in this range of maturity? Well, we're in a range of positions as an industry. Some banks have already implemented artificial intelligence initiatives, either from a customer-facing point of view, the likes of an HSBC with Nuance software to carry out voice recognition for frictionless banking, or various banks, Bank of America with its avatar, or Swedbank here in Europe. A number of banks that have already bitten the bullet and are in production with various aspects of artificial intelligence, and still further banks that I'll talk about shortly that are rolling out systemic artificial intelligence programs to improve their services, both to the customer and especially mid-office, back-office in their internal operations. But as an industry, we're probably somewhat behind some of the more advanced industries. Now, artificial intelligence isn't one particular topic. It ranges in terms of the types of artificial intelligence processing initiatives, and also obviously the patterns of capabilities in artificial intelligence. And some types of industries are more it's more relevant that they use particular patterns of processing. So, for example, medical and pharmaceutical industries have millions upon millions of data points to assess and analyze very quickly. Now, the sorts of AI that banks may use in terms of natural language processing, chatbots and so on and so forth, are not necessarily relevant to those types of industries per se in some of their core processes. So some of the more advanced industries you see in this chart are really advanced because they're using different techniques that, as I say, are not necessarily relevant to financial services. We move on then and talk about artificial intelligence. Before we do that, we have a poll, and we're going to ask you as an audience a set of questions. And I think if you scroll down, you can respond to this particular poll question. We've got another one coming up in about 15 minutes. Poll question: what is the current status of AI deployment in your institution? Are you fully deployed and working as expected? In other words, you have initiatives that you've already gone into production with, partially deployed and working as expected, partially deployed but they're not really delivering to expectations, no deployments as yet but you're planning and obviously in development mode, or no plans to deploy. In other words, the range of positions that I just described earlier somewhat in terms of maturity level. It'd be useful to get your views. If we could scroll down and vote now. So I don't know how long you normally leave this, Puneet, to get an answer, or should we carry on?
I think we can carry on and we can present out.
Okay. We'll have another question coming up in about 15 minutes. So we'll show both the results of both polls at the end of my little talk. So if we move on to the relevance of artificial intelligence and what it means from a technology and business stack. The foundation, obviously, of artificial intelligence is in data and base analytics. Now, there are lots of different processing patterns that are used in artificial intelligence. As I said before, it may be that you may be using clustering techniques for statistical analysis, which is not necessarily that relevant to banking. But if we look at the artificial intelligence stack from the point of view of financial services as the most relevant set, essentially data analytics form the foundation of all artificial intelligence building blocks, processing blocks. And base data analytics has been used for quite some time for analysis for fraud purposes, sales and marketing, credit scoring and so on and so forth, basic algorithms and even more complex algorithms. But what we're talking about in terms of AI is actually a processing layer above which allows machine learning. And specifically in more advanced techniques, what we're talking about is really neural network capabilities, artificial neural networks, and stacked networks, which is called deep learning. So types of software that allow for more complex processing, natural language processing, visual perception, and so on and so forth, are really using deep learning processing patterns where basically neural network processing has been stacked in a structured approach to allow for quite complex learning and decisioning from a point of view of artificial intelligence. As I say, there are plenty of other techniques and processing patterns, things like Bayesian networks that are used for in healthcare for example, diagnostics, symptoms solving, but they're not necessarily that relevant immediately to financial services. And obviously those building blocks in terms of processing patterns are then assembled to produce solution sets. So whether it's the likes of an Erica from Bank of America, a virtual assistant, or whether it's chatbots, robots that are really collecting information, digesting information, and providing much more rapid capability and assisting humans in their tasks, or whether it's providing expert advice, proactive advice based on a number of different sources of data and predictive analytics, or just basic robotic process automation, automating tasks that are really not entirely procedural but can be really automated and require relatively simple logic patterns to automate processes. All these are AI solutions that we can see in the market today and that are rolling out in financial services organizations. And in terms of where they're used right across the board. So we're already seeing customer-facing, mid-office, back-office, low-level operations, high-level assessment type processing being infused with artificial intelligence. And really, they're tools that can augment the existing transformation in financial services that is being delivered usually by transformational change teams that are loosely called digital. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll just run through some examples of where artificial intelligence has been used in different capacities. So Fido Bank, a German bank that's launched here in the UK as well, a direct operation digital bank. It's looked to differentiate itself from the standard market, and one of the ways it's doing that is through what it calls Fido Karma, which is essentially a customer rating mechanism that is based on the interaction of the customer with their community, the Fido community. Now they basically can contribute ideas, advice, ask questions within the Fido financial community. And that gives them scoring capability. They're also scored based on their network, their links, and their groups. And it's used to give a karma rating, which is then in turn used to drive individual preferential pricing and targeting. It helps in essentially providing feedback for customer loyalty. Okay, and if we move on to the next slide. So if we look at DBS Bank, which is one of our customers, in India, they've launched, obviously have a mobile banking proposition, and they've launched a virtual assistant called Khare. And essentially, again, it's artificial intelligence in the context of a virtual assistant that essentially has learnt to optimize its behavior such that it can handle a large number of queries and really divert a lot of the sort of queries and capabilities around dealing with transactional requests away from contact centers, call centers. They've also launched further AI capability in terms of virtual assistants that allows for interaction with humans through voice, delivering intelligent budget optimization capabilities and tooling. So they provided essentially artificial intelligence mechanisms towards the customer to better service their customers. If we move on to the next example, also in India, ICICI Bank grew with us it's on our platform, so this is a real-time operational bank, but it has grown over the years to be one of the largest banks in India. It has systemically tackled essentially automation across its estate, and what it has focused its attention on trying to automate a lot of the lower level tasks that would have been done by front, mid, back office, and it's achieved quite dramatic results in terms of increase in accuracy and time taken to respond to customers. So the grunt work, I would say, has been taken out of a lot of the processes, so that there's still human interaction, but the interaction is a lot more meaningful. So we, instead of actually having to deal with a lot of procedural interaction, the agents for the bank can actually concentrate on value-added advice to the customers. Okay, shall we move to the next slide? So those are some examples of uses. If we look at the sort of processes that may be serviced by artificial intelligence, we can see that across the board we've looked at the sort of range of processes, and these are just some examples of processes where different techniques can be applied for different purposes. So whether you're at the front office, customer service, as I said, with ICICI, or the equivalent Bank of America advisory capability in the virtual advisor called Erica, or the equivalent that Swedbank has in Sweden, Nina, there are a whole plethora of virtual advisors appearing to better service customers. And obviously they're using natural language processing and generation, so picking up on either verbal commands or reading text and analyzing customer requirements, as well as picking up various sources of data and providing proactive advice and guidance, and usually in context. And then obviously further to that, in the sort of mid-office area, we've had data analytics for a long time around risk and fraud and credit scoring. Increasingly, we're seeing a lot more artificial intelligence wrapping around service offerings. So products like SAS in the fraud detection AML space are increasingly using artificial intelligence to learn patterns of fraud behavior way beyond the basic legislated patterns to detect fraud. And companies, banks like Citibank, are investing in offerings like Fido, which look at fraud in the context of credit and lending. So it's not just the case of existing offerings are being augmented, there are new offerings coming into the market where banks are actively investing as part of their investment portfolio in fintechs. And then if we look at the back office, obviously there are a whole set of quite procedural areas within processes that can be serviced by artificial intelligence, whether it's reconciliation or securities settlement and other investment instrument settlement processing. There are lots of processes that can be semi-automated or fully automated in the back office. So if we just touch on a few over the next 5 to 10 minutes and go through some examples of where front, mid and back office can be serviced and who's doing what, so to speak. If we go to the next slide. Can you move forward one slide? Or shall I do it? Okay, so if we look at the front office, traditional marketing has classically run on campaigns, and campaigns where one would select the targeted group of customers and then run a campaign. What's increasingly happening in a networked and information-rich world is that campaigns are effectively becoming market of one. So instead of campaigns being a start-to-finish type process, patterns and behavioral patterns in context are being used to much more effectively target individuals and groups and provide proactive recommendations, and proactive recommendations in a contextual sense, so at a place, at a point in time, with the right sentiments and characteristics to get a much higher hit rate in terms of delivering successful offers. So people like, obviously everyone knows Amazon recommendations and Netflix recommendations. Those types of processes are picking up from data analytics and running artificial intelligence processes to select and proactively recommend particular offerings to the customer base. And essentially it's more a case of a market of one by customer, because the the dynamics of the data that's picked up is quite complex. So it is not a static pattern that's being used. It's essentially sort of learnt patterns that are being honed and targeted all the time at individuals. And offers are delivered not just in the context of logging onto an Amazon website, but increasingly organizations are trying to target adverts and information at points in time when it's most pertinent and the sentiment of the individual is most receptive to those offers. So Watson platforms from IBM, Watson ads are using some cognitive systems for advertising, for example. Now, if we look at sort of going through the process of a sales and marketing a life cycle, obviously one of the big barriers to interacting has been logging onto apps and authenticating in the financial services world. Well, increasingly, biometric authentication is doing away with passwords and trying to make the experience that consumers have frictionless. So whether it's an HSBC, as I mentioned earlier, biometric authentication or multi-factor authentication, getting individuals to interact without making logons and KYC processes onerous is increasingly becoming extremely important. And those technologies obviously are using artificial intelligence capabilities in the background. And beyond that, obviously, a lot of the questions that individuals have when they're looking at offers can be answered through virtual assistants, so robotic advisors, which leads you to the point where once you've actually got to a sort of a closure, you may be able to close entirely through automation without interaction with humans, but at least when individuals are coming to the final human interface, so to speak, they've actually been dealt with very effectively with different aspects of artificial intelligence. So even virtual advisor capabilities that can be provided by banks today can meet most of the equivalent of relationship management, especially when we're dealing with relatively simple products and services. So Luvo, for example, by RBS, is an example of a virtual advisor that can handle a lot of the relationship manager capabilities and basically give essential basic advice when we're in the sales process. If we go into mid-office and take an example there, obviously there are lots and lots of processes in the mid-office that can be reimagined, so to speak. But if we take fraud management, what we're seeing, and obviously fraud in a financial services organization, I don't think a lot of people realize, I'm sure the bankers on the call do, but about 50% of fraud is actually internal fraud, internal to the bank. And the other 50% is systemic fraud, whether it's transaction fraud or credit fraud or other types of fraud. It's outward facing. And obviously AI can be applied to internal fraud patterns within the bank to look and learn with regard to internal organizational fraud. But taking an example of external fraud management, as I said before, the likes of SAS and Oracle Financial Services and others have really gone to town in terms of wrapping artificial intelligence around their basic transaction pattern recognition, especially to try and recognize activity in real time. Okay, I've been told to move a bit faster. Thanks, Puneet. So in terms of where obviously mid-office can also be used from an AI point of view, we can wrap much more artificial intelligence capabilities around KYC, around unusual behavior, around third-party transacting parties, as opposed to the basic patterns of transaction fraud. And obviously the neural network capabilities in artificial intelligence can learn and relearn to look for different patterns of false negatives and false positives. And there are some classic examples. I worked for a large organization that ran prepaid cards. In 2011 we had a breach by Russian mafia, and over a long weekend in about 20 locations around the planet, that particular organization extracted about $20 million through ATMs. Now, had there been artificial intelligence and pattern recognition in terms of what was going on, that hack, which went on for quite some time, would probably have been recognized and closed down. And so it's those sorts of patterns, as well as individual transaction fraud, that are better serviced by artificial intelligence that can learn and understand patterns, more complex patterns. And finally, if we move to the last example, cash and liquidity management at the back office, increasingly cash management is moving towards a real-time and intraday position set, and with the use of artificial intelligence around advanced data analytics, we can really model on a dynamic basis what should be done and give proactive advice and guidance on notional and target balances intraday. So especially as large organizations increasingly are moving to chasing the sun type processing, and obviously want to get the last mile out of their financial flows, whether it's on the corporate side, the corporate customers, or whether it's actually the bank itself. Obviously, artificial intelligence is going to be added to as an overlay to existing cash pooling and targeting techniques to provide a much more dynamic and proactive set of advice and guidance to those organizations. So I'll leave it there. I just wanted to run through sort of 3 examples, front, mid, back office. And we have another question just after the top of the hour, overrun by about 5 minutes, but I hope that's okay. So if we go to the second question of our poll, we have, which of the below banking processes will you be prioritizing for AI deployment, assuming you are, of course? Customer experience, sales and marketing, fraud detection AML, credit scoring, cash and liquidity management. And I'm not sure there are any other selections you can make, but it'd be useful to understand whether people are investing in these areas. So we'll leave that for a minute for you to vote. So again, scroll down to vote.
And thanks, James. And I think by the time we have response from the audience, it's a good time to remind audience on the response which we got to the previous poll. I think not quite surprisingly, nobody said that we have fully deployed and working AI technologies as expected, because we are in the formative years and everybody is making that investment now. And hence we got 55% of the audience today saying we do not have deployments yet, but we plan to do it in future, which is obviously inconsistent with the most of the industry, but there are obviously early adopters. 22% say that they're partially deployed and they're working as expected, and 5% of the audience today says that partially deployed, but they're not delivering to the expectations. I think as we get the results from this second poll, let's get started. I would like to remind our audience that you can ask any questions to this panel. We're going to start with the first set of questions to our panel. We have got a base here with James articulating how this entire council view the artificial intelligence and where it could be deployed and what are the various components of the artificial intelligence one needs to keep in mind while designing a strategy. So let's start with the first question, and Gabriel, let's start with you. I think today no discussion on technology-led disruption is complete without talking about AI. How much of this discussion around AI is ahead of its time and how much of it is real? And what's possible for banks to achieve with AI up until 2018?
Okay, hi, thank you a lot, Puneet. Well, I believe that AI is definitely here to stay, right? It is very, very real. I mean, there is enough evidence out there, both in our industry and other industries, as we have seen in those examples and many others, that AI is actually generating value for companies and customers, right? So I think this is here to stay, and what we expect in the short run, I would say, with this year, next year, is to have at least achieved, in our case, 3 or 4 wins in different areas of the bank, right? Touching both, I would say, use cases on the customer side and the mid and back office, right? Like risk evaluation for small, medium businesses, or legal department, or cybersecurity. So I think next year should be, at least for us, the year to reach that internal trust in artificial intelligence at all levels in the organization that is required. I think that's one of the stoppers probably on the adoption today, right? How much of this is real. So that's the short-term goal, getting the organization to really trust, having demonstrated with 3 or 4 clear small cases what the potential is. I think that will open the doors, that will trigger the internal demand at all levels in the organization. So I think that's really, really the key for us in the short run.
Thank you for that, Gabriel. Julie, how about you? How do you see this set of technologies evolving and getting adopted up until end of 2018?
Yes, thank you, Puneet. So yeah, I also agree that AI is very real. However, I think the readiness of banks and banking platforms to utilize AI are probably a little behind the time. So what do I think is possible for banks up until the end of 2018? It's very possible to start to lay the foundations to be able to start observing and sensing your data. It's also very possible, even if you haven't started, to begin to interpret and evaluate that data. And it's important to start doing this so that you can define what some of those use cases are, so that you can have those small wins. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for banks to start moving into the deep learning capabilities of artificial intelligence, however, because machine learning has to be taught and programmed and optimized before you can really benefit from some of those things related to AI and deep learning.
Thanks, Julie. And Samir, I think we'll start with you also with the same question so that we have a same base on what's possible in near term.
So, thanks, Puneet. I think for banks till 2018, the key factor is going to be to have some very quick wins on existing use cases with some other banks internationally or globally are already trying out with. These could be items like around customer service, fraud, and some of the other examples which we saw in the presentation as well. By 2018, I think the readiness in terms of use cases, certain base use cases deployed, and then leveraging that experience and the data that you would also be gathering at that point of time for bigger wins, like, let's say, recommending the best portfolio for investment and dependent upon the customer's needs. So those things I think would be the next step, but right now till 2018 I think the banks should focus on using these technologies for small wins.
And thanks, Samir, and I think that's a great start. So Gabriel, let me come back to you. You have the hat of a business leader as well as a technology transformation leader. How do you think, the audience which is part of this conversation today should go about building a business case for AI-led investment? We all know in every organization we have scarcity of resources and one needs to always prioritize investments. Any thoughts on how we can go about building a right business case for an emerging technologies like AI?
Well, I think that first and foremost, I'm not as concerned on the business case side as I am on maybe a couple of other restricting factors that we're finding. One of them being the scarcity of resources. Even defining which is the profile of the type of resources we need for these technologies is not even necessarily clear. So one major challenge is on that side. The other one is how we speed turning AI into a core competency, right? And I'm convinced that this is a must, at least for us. We consider AI to be strategic, and we need eventually to have AI as a core competency as analytics or even risk management, right? But going to your question, obviously we need to think on business cases, and we're talking to bankers here who have to decide on investing or not on this initiative. So definitely first, do not expect to have the type of benchmarks and information you typically use on other kind of more traditional initiatives. That will be impossible at this stage of technology. So here we'll have to be more convincing, using a lot of these references we're seeing today, and playing around the concept of the art of the possible, right? And also trusting a little bit on your intuitions on where this will impact, and moving, as the rest of my colleagues said, moving small but fast, right? But I don't see us doing very complex and detailed business cases, and I think we shouldn't expect that to move ahead.
Right. Gabriel, I'm going to pick up one part of your answer, and I'm actually going to probe Samir on that further. Samir, the first thing Gabriel talked about was the lack of skill set or the people available who understand these new technologies as well as our banking domain, and obviously the enterprise application mix well. As the technology leader, I'm sure these questions are more coming to you. How do you go about finding or enabling or training your internal people for these technologies so that you have the right set of skill set available within, as well as how do you go about partnering strategy of getting the skill set from your technology partners?
Well, that's a very interesting piece, which I think we should build an AI to answer that. However, on a more serious note, I think yes, this has been a concern, and not just towards AI, but for some other emerging technologies as well, to get people who are trained and who understand the business cases and who can join the dots and kind of come up with very fantastic use cases. I think a lot of the leading banks which have already started moving towards digital or are digital already have kind of shown us the way in terms of how to proceed on this. As Gabriel also said earlier, there is no other way, but we will have to invest some resources, some time, some money in making sure that we kind of move away from our banking as usual methods and build these teams internally as well. So, things like incubators, hackathons, these are things which are being done by a lot of institutions and banks as well. These could be used by the banks to actually build their own internal skill sets, to identify partners or potential recruits, train them, seed the team, or outsource it to people who have worked globally in terms of the solutioning space or in the technology space, and bring them to work with the in-house business experts on the fraud side, customer service side, etc., which banking experts would exist, work together to build a kind of a team, or the standard build, operate, then kind of transfer kind of a model, the BOT model. So there are various ways, and I guess each bank will actually have to look inwards and figure out how do you build this team of experts who also know business as well as technology. But yeah, I guess it's also a big factor, depends upon the local skills availability. Various regions, various geographies are different skills. Like in the Africa region, we are still grappling with data, and to move on to something like an AI, you need to get those things in place first. So we need to build these skill sets. It's a huge gap. Each bank or each organization will have to figure out their own strategy, what works for them. I think we can take a leaf out of books of certain banks, digital banks, which are doing very well, and kind of move in that direction as well. Incubators, hackathons, I think those make sense to me right now.
Sure, Samir. I'm sure there are many such platforms wherein we can collaborate with not only developers but also startups to, accelerate some part of AI deployment within the organizations apart from working with traditional and more large vendors like Infosys. So moving on, Julie, I'm gonna request for a response on a question which is very close to your area of work. We saw how artificial intelligence can have profound impact the way banks deliver services to the customers on digital channel, and we saw several examples, right? What's your point of view? How much do you believe AI can help you enhance the digital engagements on these new channels? And what is the right approach to get there?
Yes. So yes, digital is near and dear to my heart. Eastern Bank right now is James talked about the different levels of AI maturity, and Eastern Bank is right now between the watchers and the explorers. So we've really started to focus on different use cases where we think that this might benefit us the most, and starting to do that research. And we're also starting to build our skills in this area and starting to do small initiatives. And so for those that are listening in, there's two different areas that I think that that this will improve and enhance the digital engagement and help drive growth through the digital channels. The first being, how can we enhance digital engagement, right? And so some of the small wins that might be able to be taken advantage of fairly quickly is in the authentication area. So there's really great tools out there right now that allow banks to use natural language recognition and processing to help understand and recognize behaviors for login, for transactions, making real-time payments, really focusing on making that a little less frictionless for the customer, using those authentication capabilities. We've actually implemented Nuance in our call center, where we enroll our customers' voice prints, and when they call, they don't need to answer all of those questions on a regular basis. We're looking to take that and bring it out into our digital channels as well. Another area too is fraud management. So taking the information, we have all the transactional information, taking that information and really helping the customers be able to better manage their transactions, letting them be aware of potential frauds, looking at those hacking patterns and being aware of those so that we can help better protect our customers, so it enhances their digital experience as well. And then also another area in this enhancing the digital engagement is starting to look at the financial advisories services with virtual assistants and artificial intelligence. So, banking, and is probably not really ready for a lot of this voice natural language processing for the purposes of a virtual assistant. I think this needs a little bit more maturity, but there are some really great solutions out there that provide that capability for that digital chatting, to use that natural language processing and generation, which will help ensure consistent answers to questions that our customers have in the digital channels. And it'll allow our service reps that are now answering these types of questions to focus on more complicated servicing requests and really driving growth. And then if we talk about the driving growth in the digital channels, there's so many opportunities to use artificial intelligence when it comes to customer deposit and loan origination, making these processes much more intuitive and frictionless for our customers. It'll not only improve the customer journey from the front, but it'll also make the back office operational tasks and creditworthiness assessment processes that are labor intensive much more streamlined and efficient and effective by utilizing, AI for both the processing up front as well as back office and mid office. Another area where growth can be driven is sales and marketing. Really using AI to analyze customers' behaviors, understanding what new markets, understanding our market segmentation, personalizing customer communications, learning and reacting to their buying decisions. This information is readily available. There's quite a few options that are available out there that could be implemented really quickly. And then finally, expert advisors. So this is a really great potential for banking to utilize wealth and insurance recommendation agents to be able to drive some growth in the digital channels as well. So that's really recommendations in order to help drive AI through digital channels.
Thank you for that, Julie. I think I have the results of the second poll, and you have more expectations coming your way. I think the audience believes, so 50% of the audience says that they would like to prioritize AI use cases for customer experience, so more work for you. And followed by 29% of the audience believes the second most important area to prioritize would be fraud detection and AML. And followed by a tie for sales and marketing and cash and liquidity management. And the last one, surprisingly though, was credit scoring. And I think, I'm going to take a question on from the audience, which is, can AI help in predicting or controlling cybersecurity threats and attacks? And James, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Yes, and the answer is absolutely. Previous to work, I actually worked on a proposition, not for Infosys, but for another company, which is actually security as a service. And when you look at what you can do, well, first and foremost, when you look at the cybersecurity threat and actually realize where most banks are, especially international banks, they have large network footprints, and they don't even know where their endpoint encryption is. They don't know what's sitting on which parts of the network, where, how old things are. So security threats are an enormous problem for banks in terms of the distribution of software that they have and the potential for attacks. Because one of the issues is that you don't know where your vulnerability is until it's been exposed as a vulnerability in some other network, and it's only at that point that you then need to be able to very quickly answer the questions of where you might be vulnerable. And that having an artificial intelligence capability that understands the patterns and can keep looking at different patterns of software and cybersecurity issues is obviously a massive benefit. A lot of what's done today is a very reactive, labor-intensive approach to trying to manage threats. And so AI can absolutely help in that area.
Thank you, James. And I think I would like to first thank our panel for giving this very frank feedback. And I'm sure there are more questions which our audience has. I would request that if you have questions, please put it on the question window, and we would come back to those responses offline, or would point you to those responses if they're covered in our point of view paper, which is available as part of this webinar. I think I would like to spend last 2 minutes to very quickly brief you about what we as an organization, Infosys, is doing in this area. I think many of you would be aware that we have a very comprehensive AI platform called Infosys NIA. It has essentially 3 components: a data platform, which is an open source advanced data analytics and machine learning platforms that enables banks to operationalize their data assets and uncover new opportunities through utilizing that data effectively. The second component is the knowledge platform, which allows banks to capture, formalize the process knowledge and create a representation of those processes in a powerful ontology-based structures. And these structures essentially allow you to reuse this knowledge as the systems change. And lastly, but more importantly, is the automation component, which allows, which obviously brings along a platform which has robotic process automation, predictive automation, and cognitive automation. All of these components are designed essentially to have human resources available in our organizations to do more creative and customer-centric conversation rather than doing routine tasks, and model complex systems and problems so that system can analyze way more data which is available in the organization to carve out a very, very actionable set of insights. And we're using it across areas such as forecasting revenues, deeply understanding the contracts and the legal documents. We are working with over 100 use cases across industries. In particular, when we look at banking, we have prioritized our work in certain set of areas, and those areas are covered in the next slide, which you see on the screen. These are in the area of robotic process automation. We have clients leveraging our platform to automate processes across applications, across variety of systems. We are working on conversational banking through essentially chatbot based as well as voice based interactions. We are working on a variety of customer insights related use cases. We are investing a lot of time on fraud management as well as creating interactive business dashboards for a variety of business functions. So, if you believe these are the areas where your organization also has an interest in, and you would like to have a discussion with Infosys, you have a next poll coming your way. Feel free to choose the answer as yes, and our teams will get in touch with you. I know we have covered our time which we had today, and I would like to thank our panel once again for joining us, and I would like to thank our audience for joining us today. I hope you found the webinar useful. You would have a feedback link. Do let us know what you think about this webinar, and feel free to download the point of view paper, and happy to have this interaction continue. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye for now.